Emmitsburg is really the center of the fire service of our country. The National Fire Academy is here. People from really not only over the nation but all over the world come to Emmitsburg for training.
We've always seemed to be the leader of this area when it came to new technology and things like that. We can go anywhere in the country and say we're from Emmitsburg, and they treat you like you're one of them.
It's volunteer, and you just do it out of the love for the company and the love for what you're doing.
To be 100% volunteer in itself is a rarity in these times.
And the thing that you really think about when you see these guys working is that they were all doing something different, dramatically different a couple minutes ago. They were out at home or with their families or out to dinner or doing something at work, and the volunteer siren goes off and they come running.
Vigilant Hose Company actually goes way back to the early 1800s. There's records really of a fire company here as far back as in the 1820s. You know, in reality, before we had organized fire protection and volunteer fire companies in the communities did what they could. And really that was the beginning of the bucket brigades, where people would just grab what they had, try to run, take water. Maybe they would take a coat and slam it up against the fire to try to extinguish it and remove the oxygen. So it was very unorganized efforts. Predominantly the men were the ones that were required in some cases to participate in a bucket brigade, but really the whole community did. You know, anybody that was able to was recruited to help carry the water. And as more and more activities would happen in the community requiring participation, then they formally would start to organize themselves. We had a major fire in Emmitsburg, had several fires over the years in Emmitsburg, but a major fire in the town. And ultimately, Emmitsburg decided they needed to organize a community department, a formal organization, which the Vigilant Hose Company was eventually organized into in 1884. And then ultimately, the communities purchased a hand pumper. It was a piston-type pumper, mainly built in England at the time, the early 1800s, and they'd be able to actually pump water. People would throw water into these pumpers, and then they could pump them out of the pumper onto a fire, or they could take the pumpers up to a cistern or a creek and pump water from a water source. We went from the hand pumpers, and they were pulled by hand, not only pumped by hand, but pulled by hand. And then in about the mid-1850s, steam pumpers came about. Now, Vigilant Hose Company never had a steam pumper. The town of Emmitsburg never had a steam pumper. But there were several in Frederick. When we came with motorized apparatus, they would have the running boards on the sides and on the back of the apparatus, which of course we don't do today. But that was the predominant means of transportation to the fire. You jump on the apparatus and hold on in all kinds of wind and rain and weather. And if you can imagine being in Emmitsburg and have to go, let's say, to Thurmont in the middle of a snowstorm with an old the Model A, for example, that they had, or the Fords that were purchased in the 40s.
We used to have that thing loaded, riding on the side and everything else, and it was an open cab. And I can recall one fire I drove to at 4 o'clock in the morning, froze my face, had goggles on, and when I took the goggles off, I tore the skin the whole way around where the goggles were.
The cab was open, and they only had one coat at that time, which the driver got to wear.
Back then, you got on the back of a fire truck and you hung on to a metal bar that went across. At that time, there wasn't even a safety bar behind you. You had a flap laying up on the top of a hose bed that you literally crawled under as much as you could to keep the weather off of you.
We didn't have the equipment that they have today, that's for sure. We just had a hat, boots, and a coat. The air mask that they have today, ours was the old World War II gas mask.
You put your helmet on, you put your coat on, you got a hose in your hand, and when the water got to you, you turned the hose on. I went out to a fire in a truck that had 50 gallons of water in a garden hose, and I put the garden hose up over my arm and ran under a bunch of pine trees and turned the garden hose on. The guy back at the truck, just the two of us, he's got the pump running. I said, what are we gonna do? He said, you're gonna put the fire out and I'm gonna get the pump running. And it was that simple. That's the way you fought the fire. In order to get a response from the fire company, you had to make a phone call. You didn't have 911, so you had to make a certain phone number, probably a 3-digit number or 4-digit number. The phone would ring over here at this garage.
They would then run to the fire hall, to ring the bell, which was the way of alerting the firemen at that time. Had a rope right here in this room that you would pull and ring the bell on top of the building. Then later, why, we got a siren. The calls would then go to these people that had fire phones.
We actually had in our restaurant and in our home what they called the fire phone, which there were several of those around the community. But since we had the restaurant that was open 7 days a week and staffed 18 hours a day, we were the main call takers. So that was the first thing you learned when you went to work at the restaurant. It wasn't how to take orders, it wasn't, you know, how to cook or that. It was what you did when the fire phone rang.
To be a good member of a volunteer fire company, first off, you certainly had to be dedicated.
When the fire siren rang, we would run out of the store. We would leave our customers sitting there, and they never said anything.
You're sitting in the barber's chair, and that happened to a lot of guys here because Mac McLaughlin being fire chief, that fire whistle blew, that door flew open, he was gone, and you were sitting there with an apron around your neck and a half a haircut, and it might be 2 days later until you got that haircut completed. To literally stand on the center square of Emmitsburg and see people coming out of the doors, coming from every direction, cars flying, and you know, just amazing. Back when I was in the fire company in the 60s, wasn't anything to have a good, strong 15 or 20, maybe as many as 25 firefighters running to the fire hall from everywhere, you know. People being double parked up Main Street to be able to jump out of the car and go in to get their gear on and go on a fire call. Just the turnout was really something to see.
And the thing that you really think about when you see these guys working is that they were all doing something different, dramatically different a couple minutes ago. They were out at home or with their families or out to dinner or doing something at work, and the volunteer siren goes off and they come running.
A lot of things that we go through that we do, and we're not getting paid for it, but we work harder here than you do some of your jobs. But if your heart's into it and you really want to do it, you can do it.
You know, they're the hardest working guys out there. It takes a lot to volunteer. You know, they're not getting paid for it, so it takes a true person to do it, and I'm grateful that there's people out there that do it.
You have to have a passion almost that you want to do this.
It's what's inside of you, you know. It's not, you know, any kind of ego thing, no trip or anything. It's just, it's what's in your heart, you know, to help your community, help your family.
What is given is not always noticeable to the general public, and he has to have the understanding of his wife and the kids to this whole thing, to the whole concept that he's a volunteer firefighter, and that sort of takes over. It's his life. And these guys are that way. Girls too. I mean, they are so dedicated.
It's not the fact of their response to the fire. What impressed me in my experience with the Vigilant Hose Company was the following day when about 6 or so men came to the back door just to see how I was doing. To have these men come down the following day is just off the charts impressive.
If you're involved in the fire company in any degree, I think you've got to be into public service because you've got to care for people, and you have to give up a lot more than maybe local people realize.
The volunteer work itself, it's a lot of commitment, it's a lot of time. Certainly the training is a major commitment itself, particularly if you advance into the emergency medical technician. You could be easily looking 300 hours of training.
I think being a firefighter is an awesome thing to do. If you find it to be your passion, pursue it. I'm 19 and yes, I am a firefighter EMT. I have been on a few fires, but nothing too serious. Mainly I help with rehab. I do a lot of exterior work. I'm not quite comfortable yet doing interior work. I'm working my way into it. Once I get in that comfort level, I'll be doing interior work. I really enjoy it, and I'm right now going to school to become a paramedic to further my education in this field.
There's a spirit here of volunteerism in Emmitsburg that I've never seen in the other two companies I belong to. It's father, son, grandfather. It's like a tradition here.
I just remember it's always been a part of our family. I mean, we go back to like Sunday dinners. We all have dinner at my parents' house every Sunday, and the minute the fire siren went off, there went all the guys out the door. And I just remember sometimes we'd wait to eat, and sometimes we couldn't because they'd be gone for hours on end.
I mean, sometimes you would think, you know, do you have to go? But then I always would think, if that was my house or my parents' house, you would want them to go. We've missed a lot of meals and, you know, family functions and things like that, but you always have to think that somebody else is in need.
It didn't matter whether it would be Christmas or Thanksgiving dinner or you know, Sunday, just a Sunday morning breakfast. When the phone rang, we knew that Dad was going to be gone, and we understood that. We were taught that as youngsters that it meant that somebody needed help.
I remember one Christmas Eve, there was a house fire in Fairfield. The alarm went off, we were just getting ready to eat dinner on Christmas Eve and then open gifts later, and the guys all left for the fire call, and we were kind of like, well, this is our Christmas, but we knew that there was somebody else that needed help, and the guys were all there to help them, so I think that made us feel good.
Probably 60 or 70% of our membership has a family tradition in the fire department. It was what was expected of you. It was expected to, you know, to follow that tradition, get involved in one way or the other, whether it be the auxiliary or as a social member that would help with our fundraising, or an active firefighter. So we're very fortunate, and I think that's one of the reasons that we're so strong, is the family tradition.
Emmitsburg still has a lot of that. They still have the family members, still have those individuals that, you know, their father was a member, their grandfather was a member, or their mother was in the auxiliary, and still coming into the fire service. And that's almost becoming unique in the volunteer fire service.
When you grow up in the fire service, knowing that this is what our family does, I think it's just important that we carry on generation after generation. I could name probably 5 or 6 different families that are in the fire company. That's probably 4th, maybe even 5th generation volunteers and firefighters.
It's more of a family than it is a community. We play hard together, we fight hard together, we argue hard together, we do everything that a typical family would do, but when the bell goes off, you forget about all of that, and you come to work, or if somebody gets down with their personal life, we all chip in and we find a way to help them, no matter what it is, whether they have to, you know, whether they're moving or they have a financial problem. We always find a way, just as a family would, to pull each other through, and that's a good feeling all the time. That's a good feeling to have.